So tonight I'm going to Ring of Honor Final Battle in Columbus, Ohio. And I do want to say that, unfortunately I couldn't do a lot in Ohio because it was really, really freaking cold. I actually underestimated and did not bring my coat even. So, I just only went to two burger places. It's definitely a very controversial show because I felt like with how Tony Khan has been running the company, he doesn't give it a lot of attention really. He's almost like, okay, well, it's just like too much on his plate. So he kind of it's like really become an afterthought company. And there are a lot of wrestlers on the roster that I do believe have a lot of potential, but a lot of them are not utilized correctly. And some people are saying Ring of Honor should be like the NXT, like it should be a developmental show. Like last year when they went to the Manhattan Center, they actually had Matt Cardona wrestle Chris Jericho just to kind of show you that they've not really built up the Ring of Honor roster that well to have a heavyweight contender from their brand face Chris Jericho. They actually had to go to the Indies and get Matt Cardona. And then also last year, somebody was saying like they didn't know Athena was the champion, and somebody was actually saying too they actually thought Athena died. Like what is Athena doing nowadays? Like a lot of people don't know that she's been a champion in Ring of Honor for 3 years. Like she may actually pass the Roman Reigns multi-year reign, the Hulk Hogan 1980s reign, but a lot of people don't even know that she's actually been the Ring of Honor champion for 3 years because the company's not mattered that much. And actually, even on Wikipedia, you can look up that Trish Stratus is credited as the longest reigning women's champion of the 2000s. And actually, it's Athena. Athena's held, her championship for like almost 2 to 3 times longer than Trish Stratus. So that's definitely, very concerning, really. But with Ring of Honor, it's almost like buying a $100 lottery ticket. You just don't know what you're going to get when you go to these shows. I know last year when I went to, Supercard of Honor in Dallas, I got to shake hands with Dustin Rhodes, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. I was able to yell at the top of my lungs, Vince McMahon can suck my fucking dick. You should have been the WWF champion, Dustin. Got to shake his hands. He probably shook my hand because I said all that shit, which is true. He should have been the WWF champion. Fuck Vince McMahon. He can suck this. He can suck this. When I went to Mexico City earlier this year, Mascara Dorada and Bandito, like those two motherfuckers, they tore down Mexico City last June, like early June this year. Those motherfuckers really tore it down, and they became one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. So sometimes you can have these really excellent shows where the wrestlers are like, we got to give a fuck, we got to be a bigger deal. And usually I've been happy every single time I've gone to Ring of Honor shows. So I want to talk about the match card tonight really quickly. That one of the matches I want to see is Lee Moriarty versus Nigel McGuinness. So like Nigel McGuinness has been doing a career renaissance. He's been coming back. He's been doing really great matches. They're in a 30-minute Broadway tonight for the Pure Championship. So I can't wait to see that. And then also Lee Moriarty had a match with Hangman Adam Page really. So you could probably do something where he beats Nigel McGuinness and maybe you see him help Hangman Adam Page score Strickland. A way to build a new star, a way to build a new star from Ring of Honor. The other match that I want to see is Dalton Castle versus Ricochet. I like Dalton Castle and his metrosexual gimmick, that always gets a smile out of me. And then also I'll come out of the closet and say that I am metrosexual as well. But I also want to mention too that Ricochet is a habitual line stepper, just like Rick James. So I like Ricochet and his new gimmick. I like that he's really reinvented himself. He's having great matches. He's won the national championship, and part of the national championship is defending it in other promotions on other brands, really. So obviously, this is just ultimately like saying, hey, I'm not going to hold this title for a long time and just hold it over my shoulders like Okada does. He's actually going to get out and just have matches. And then there's Shane Taylor Promotions versus Skyflight. And I'm really happy to see this because Shane Taylor, as people call him, the Suge Knight looking motherfucker. He looks like Suge Knight. Definitely, I'm happy to see him. He has a really great voice. He has a lot of potential. It's a little bad that he's not on the AW roster because can you imagine Shane Taylor versus Eddie Kingston, Shane Taylor versus Mark Briscoe, Shane Taylor versus Samoa motherfucking Joe, Shane Taylor versus Bobby motherfucking Lashley. Those will be all really, really great matches and stuff like that. So he's one of those, he's one of those wrestlers that has a lot to give. And then the last match is Bandito in a five-way elimination match. And what happened was it's going to be Bandito versus Roosh. but Roosh got injured. So what they're going to do is they're going to have Bandito versus 5 different people. And the way it goes is that you get pinned, you're out until it's a one-on-one. And then the winner of that one-on-one becomes the ROH champion, or Bandito retains. So Bandito's become one of my favorite wrestlers of the year. So I really kind of wonder, what they're going to do. He and Brody King lost the tag team titles a few weeks ago, Full Gear. So maybe Brody King can come in and attack him, and then they can have a feud with each other. Or you can do something like, have Bandito win, and you're almost like, what's the next direction for him? Like, Bandito has a really great future. In my opinion, he's the ROH version of Rey Mysterio. Like, he's like Rey Mysterio in a way. He's like that underdog, has really great matches, really epic stuff. Like, when you watch the match, you're like, wow, this motherfucker has a lot of fight in him. And he really has a lot of heart and soul in his movements. So whenever he has something that's really great. So, I'll come back tonight after the show and tell you off the wall crazy motherfuckers how I feel about ROH Final Battle. So I'm right here at GalaxyCon, and there's a couple of things about this. That this is a big anime convention center. The other thing about it is that there's a lot of professional wrestlers around here that are obviously selling autographs. Like, I saw that Scott Steiner and a couple other people were here as well, really. So it's really interesting, just diversity of just different people, different things that people are into. So again, since I'm going to go to Japan in March, this is kind of like an early, type of thing. So guys, I do want to talk about Ring of Honor, and I do want to say that Final Battle was not a good show to me, and it was also extremely frustrating. That the biggest thing that they said was that the show is going to end at 10 p.m. and then it, extended until, 12:15. And this is kind of like the big issue with AEW, is that they don't understand that long shows are very disrespectful because it holds people up. And then the other part of it is that when you advertise a show and it says this is done at 10 p.m., people have to cancel their plans and other things like that. So ultimately, it's almost like, as I said, it's almost like, going to a restaurant and they tell you to stay for dessert, and then they give everybody a tour of the restaurant. And then you're at the point where you're yelling at the manager, everybody, hey, we need to get going, wrap it up, please, type of thing like that. Like, I had to cancel some plans because the show went on longer than 10 p.m. But with that said, the match card and the matches were definitely really good. The match of the night was Mercedes versus Red Velvet. For a couple of reasons. They did a lot of high power moves to each other, a lot of reversals, a lot of things like that. And then Red Velvet beat Mercedes. And this is a good option because obviously you want Mercedes to have some vulnerability. You want Mercedes to help get people over, really. And it's really ultimately now Red Velvet's got some momentum. What do you do after that? That's kind of in my opinion, the best match, because obviously one big thing about matches is what does the end result do, really. It kind of puts some attention on Red Velvet. And Mercedes is kind of going down this angle of she might lose belt, she might have a sense of vulnerability because she's upset that she can't win the main title. So there's definitely some good story progression. The other match that I felt was another match of the night was the Fatal 5-Way Elimination. But there's a lot of high flyer moves. I'm a little worried with AEW because they may be treating the Ring of Honor title like it's a luchador title, because you have a bunch of luchadors and high flippers and everything like that. And the problem with that is, this is not CMLL, this is not Lucha Underground, this is AEW. So you need a diversity of wrestlers. So I'm a little worried about that happening, where they may just over-feature luchadors a little too much with this title, especially with their work relationship with CMLL. But ultimately, Bandito did a really great job. I was saying to myself, it would have been really interesting if he won and then Brody King turned heel and beat him down, and then he set up Brody King versus Bandito ROH Championship at World's End. and then Brody King's like, you know what, you're kind of weak, really. And just like Samoa Joe, I see myself as somebody who's done tag team a lot. I need to do something bigger and better, really. So I felt like they could have turned him heel, and that would have been the best thing, really, just to do something different. But they kind of just stuck to their guns of Bandito and Brody King just, being cool with each other. Dalton Castle and Ricochet, this is kind of the match that saved the show, because a lot of people were happy to see Dalton Castle. A lot of people felt they did a really great job in the boys and all the entertainment. Like, really, this kind of was like the booster shot. Like, I think the first part of the show was slow and boring and drawn out, and it kind of told you this is going to be a long night. But when Dalton Castle came, it kind of created some excitement, and it really became a good show. And then the other match I enjoyed was Persephone versus Athena, and I was happy to see this match. Athena did a really great job. There's some points where you thought Persephone was going to win, but obviously Athena wins at the very end. There's this girl that was going around with Athena, and she was dressed up as Tandro from Demon Slayer. I actually like that a lot, because obviously Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba is actually in the cultural zeitgeist right now. So obviously it makes sense for her to dress up like a popular character. Like a few years ago when the Avengers Endgames was going on, it would make sense for someone to dress up like Thanos or dress up as another character in that movie, really. So, so I appreciate that touch, really. That made a lot of, that was good. The other thing about it was that they did have a bunch of pre-show matches, but again, they should have just easily said, okay, this is going to be a 4-hour show, Tony. Let's just try to start the show at 7 p.m. instead of just having an hour pre-show matches. So that way we don't have a fucking show that, if you count the pre-show, was like it was close to 5.5 hours, which is unacceptable. But one thing that I appreciate during the pre-show is that they had the Death Riders, and they also had some people from the AEW roster, so I do appreciate that as well, because obviously, you get people a little excited, and I also appreciate Mercedes being on this card, and Eddie Kingston as well, really, because obviously you need to, because with ROH, you need to kind of have some like AEW stars to kind of like excite people. But overall, like, as I said, this show is way longer than it needed to be. A lot of the matches were definitely very predictable. I think my least favorite match of the night was the 30-minute Iron Man match, because they went for 30 minutes and then they had like an overrun, like a sudden death type of thing, and it went for like 4 or 5 more minutes, really. So it was kind of like, and then also like the last part of it was that I think Lee Moriarty was up a couple of points, and then he just gradually just lost. I think got to an intentional sudden death, and I really wish they didn't do that, because that becomes predictable, and that's kind of been overdone in AEW. Like I said, you have a match card that's like 12, 13 matches, and then one of them is like a 30-minute match, and one of them has a sudden death in it. Like, get the fuck out of here. That's just too much, really. But like I said, overall, I'm happy that I went, but I'm definitely going to be a lot more selective of the Ring of Honor shows I want to go to. Like, obviously, I went to this show because I'm going to Cincinnati tomorrow. Unfortunately, I was going to go to Thurman's Tavern after the show, but once again, because they're disrespectful, and they're like, okay, if a show gets out of 10, that means we add an extra 2.5 hours to it. I was not able to go tonight, so I might be able to go tomorrow, really. But again, like I said on the board, and I'll say it again, that longer doesn't mean better. Sometimes longer shows are very disrespectful. And it also shows that you can't cut things down or be like, hey, you know what, here are some matches we can save for World's End, or Winters is coming, or we can do ROH Winters is coming and add an extra hour to it. Like, they really have to learn how to trim the fat, really, but this is not a company that does that. So, again, Final Battle was good. I would say way better than the one last year, because at least you had Bandito face 4 other people on the roster, instead of like we did last year, where you had to get Matt Cardona from the Indies because they weren't making any new stars in ROH really. But like I said before, and I'll say it again, it was all right. I would ultimately give the show like a C-. I think that you had a lot of great matches. It was action-packed. People really cared, but ultimately way longer than it needed to be. So that's why I put it in the C- range, because ultimately that's what I remember from this show. That was longer. It held me up, and they just don't know how to just say, okay, can we have a show that's at least 3 fucking hours? No, everything has to be 5 hours and we count a preliminary show. Like, get the fuck out of here, AEW, because eventually you're going to get that diminishing return because people are going to say, oh, well, it's way, way, way too long, and a lot of people are saying that now, so they're not fixing their problem.